Good evening, everyone. The general format for this is I'm going to speak in conversation with Alistair for perhaps half an hour, 45 minutes, and then we'll throw it open to the floor for questions. It's a cliche, but Alistair genuinely needs no introduction. Born in London, I think that's correct, raised in Scotland, went to that excellent university, Aberdeen, from which I'm also a graduate, trained as an advocate, and then was returned to Parliament in 1987, I think for this constituency, for Edinburgh Central. And then from 1997, one of only 3 cabinet ministers to serve the entire duration of the 3 Labour governments. First of all, as Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Secretary of State for Social Security, Work and Pensions, Transport, to which Scotland was then added, Trade and Industry, and finally for 3 years as Chancellor of the Exchequer. As Alistair notes in his book, the line, "a safe pair of hands," will inevitably be included in his obituary. And he's also had numerous other accolades. For 2 years in a row, as he also notes, he was voted the most boring politician of the year, but also latterly the great survivor, appropriately enough. And his book, which is a thoroughly enjoyable read, is a record of nearly 1,000 days at the Treasury. And it has a terrific opening line for a political memoir. "I don't believe in panicking before it's absolutely necessary, but I came close to considering it on the morning of 7th of October 2008. What do you remember about that day?
I think principally that I received the sort of telephone call you never want to receive. You remember in October 2008, this is when the banking crisis, or perhaps I should say the first banking crisis, hit us. It was just about 3 weeks after the collapse of Lehman Brothers, the big American investment bank, and things were getting tighter and tighter. Banks were refusing to lend to each other. Banks lend each other billions of pounds, over short periods, overnight, and so on. And what was happening to RBS is that slowly but surely, other banks would stop lending it money because they didn't believe they'd be able to pay it back. And when you think about it, if a bank gets into that position, it really is deteriorating. Now, we were working on a plan which we'll no doubt come back to recapitalise our banks. And we were almost ready to announce it, but not quite. And on the evening of the 6th of October, I'd met the chief executives and chairman of the biggest UK banks. We discussed the various things we might do, but we weren't ready to go ahead. Guess what happens if you have a meeting with 6 people? At least 2 of them phoned up 2 journalists and gave them an inaccurate account of what was going to happen. A story appeared in the BBC later that night and the FT the next morning suggesting that RBS might need funds. And so on that morning, when the stock market opened, the shares on RBS started to plummet. And at that morning, I was going to one of these routine meetings of European finance ministers, about which you hear quite a lot now. I flew to Luxembourg at about 5 in the morning. By the time I got there, RBS shares had been suspended once. After I started the meeting, they were then suspended a second time. And, that is, again, the bank, this is pretty terminal. And I remember being asked to come out to the meeting by my private secretary, and I remember being looked at by all my other finance minister colleagues who knew full well that something was very, very wrong. Indeed, Christine Lagarde, who you may have seen on the television the other night, who's a first-class managing director of the IMF, by the way, and whose English is more fluent than mine is, said to me, RBS is finished, isn't it? And that's just what I wanted to hear. I went upstairs. And I took a call from Tom McKillop, who was the chairman of RBS, and he said to me, "We're hemorrhaging money." He said, "We're fast running out." And he said, "What are you going to do about it?" And what you think about it, you tend to think all these guys running banks and earning vast sums of money, you think they do know what to do about it. But he was clearly in a desperate position. And I think this is where the panic comes in, that he knew and I knew there was a plan almost ready to go. And I said, "How long can you last?" And, I thought he'd maybe say 2 or 3 days. And what he said was the thing that did actually send a shiver down my back. He said, well, maybe 2 or 3 hours. And if you think about it, if RBS it was going to run out of money, they'd have had to shut the doors, the cash machines would have gone off. RBS does most of the transmission systems, the supermarket payments and so on, they would have gone as well. And the obvious thing would happen, if you had money in RBS and you could no longer get in, you would be in a terrible position. But all your friends who've got money in the other banks would think, well, if it can happen to them, it can happen to our bank. And, I think it's not disputed. Within hours, the British banking system would have gone down, and then during the course of the day, the American system would have collapsed with it. Now, things are bad now, but if the system had actually stopped where you physically can't get money anymore, that is, one of these occasions when I do think that panic should at least be contemplated. Now,